Keanu Reeves entered the mall with firm steps, dressed simply in a black t-shirt, sunglasses, and hands in his pockets. He observed everything, but no one recognized him. In the corner, a security guard narrowed his eyes, scanning him with disdain. "Hey, this isn't a place to wander around. Move along out," the guard ordered. Keanu remained calm. He didn't argue. He didn't react. He simply watched as well-dressed customers received warm smiles, while others were met with cold stares. He took a step back, turned slowly, and walked away. The security guard crossed his arms, satisfied to see him leave. But the next day, he would realize he had made the biggest mistake of his life and would pay dearly for it. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel. Tomorrow, we have another special story for you. The luxury mall shimmered under the dazzling lights of its pristine corridors. The marble floors gleamed, reflecting the elegant movement of well-dressed customers adorned in brands worth more than a modest car. The air carried a subtle mix of expensive perfumes and the sweet aroma of artisanal coffee served in delicate cups. Keanu Reeves walked slowly among the stores, unnoticed, a shadow among the elite. His face, one of the most famous in Hollywood, was hidden behind dark sunglasses and the low brim of a black baseball cap. He wore a simple black t-shirt, unbranded, understated, nothing that screamed wealth or status. He wasn't there to be recognized. His eyes scanned the corridors, observing, analyzing, feeling the space that, on paper, belonged to him. Yet, at that moment, he was just another stranger, and that was when he noticed it. At first glance, the mall seemed flawless, but something was wrong. In front of a jewelry store, a well-dressed woman walked in and was immediately welcomed by two smiling attendants. Champagne was offered, and their conversation seemed friendly, almost intimate. Seconds later, a couple entered the same store. Their clothes were simple but clean. They hesitated for a moment before approaching the counter. No one greeted them. Keanu watched as they stood there, exchanging uncomfortable glances. A minute passed, then two, then three. Finally, one of the salespeople looked up and, without even smiling, spoke in a dry tone. "Can I help you?" The voice carried fatigue, or perhaps disdain. The couple exchanged a glance before shaking their heads and walking out. Inside, the well-dressed woman kept laughing with the attendants. A knot tightened in Keanu's stomach. He continued walking, noticing more details. The security guard, strategically positioned, watched certain types of customers more closely. The nervousness of some employees when passing by well-dressed managers. The impatient, almost dismissive tone of voice a waiter used when speaking to a young man who clearly didn't fit the usual clientele. He had seen this before in luxury hotels, in high-end restaurants, on film sets. The difference was, here, it was happening under his name, and that unsettled him more than it should have. Taking a deep breath, he decided to run a test. He stopped in front of a high-end men's boutique and stepped toward the glass door. Before he could enter, he felt a presence beside him. "Hey you, what are you doing here?" The voice was firm, laced with suspicion. Keanu turned slowly. The security guard was tall, muscular, his assessing gaze scanning Keanu's black t-shirt, sunglasses, and baseball cap before locking onto his face. "I'm just looking around," Keanu replied, his voice calm, the same controlled tone he often used in films. "This place isn't for just anyone," the guard said, crossing his arms. Keanu raised an eyebrow beneath his sunglasses. "Just anyone. I don't want any trouble." The man cut in. "Just leave." Keanu considered it. He could reveal his identity right then and there. He could call the mall manager and resolve the issue in seconds. But he didn't. Instead, he held on to that feeling, that sentence. This place isn't for just anyone. He knew he wasn't the only one who had ever heard those words. And that night, he would lie awake thinking about them and what they meant for so many others who walked through that mall every day. The next day arrived with golden sunlight, reflecting off the mall's spotless glass storefronts. The luxury shopping center was alive with movement, but not for everyone. Keanu returned, wearing the same outfit as the day before, a black t-shirt, sunglasses, and a black baseball cap. Simple, discreet, without luxury brands. He didn't need to disguise himself as someone who didn't belong there. For certain eyes, his clothing already said it all, and those eyes found him quickly. The same security guard from the previous day was at his usual post, scanning the crowd with his evaluating stare. When he spotted Keanu, his expression shifted. He didn't recognize him yet, but he was already sure of one thing. This man didn't belong here. The security guard walked straight toward Keanu, puffing his chest, his voice dripping with artificial authority. "You again," the guard said. Keanu remained calm. "Is there a rule that says I can't be here?" The guard smirked. "Come on, man. No need to cause trouble. This isn't a place for you." "Got it." Keanu got it. He understood what the security guard saw. He understood that, to him, a man in a black t-shirt and a baseball cap had no legitimate reason to be there. He understood that he was not the first to hear those words and certainly wouldn't be the last. But this story would have a different ending. Keanu ignored the security guard and kept walking. The mall corridors felt even colder now. He could feel the discreet glances of some people around him, curious, judgmental. Maybe they were wondering if he was a thief or a worker wandering where he shouldn't be. He made his way toward the cafe, not because he was hungry, but because he wanted to observe more. The security guard didn't move away. Keanu stepped inside the cafe and stood in line. Ahead of him, a well-dressed woman was greeted with a warm smile from the barista. "Good morning, ma'am." "The usual." The woman chuckled. "Oh, you know me so well." A few minutes later, it was Keanu's turn. The barista didn't smile. "What do you want?" The tone was dry. Keanu noticed a pattern. "A black coffee, please." The barista quickly punched the order into the register. "Cash or card?" Keanu glanced sideways. The woman before him hadn't paid yet. This wasn't just bad service. It was a code. For some customers, payment came after. For others, before. The security guard watched everything from a distance, arms crossed, as if waiting for Keanu to do something wrong. Keanu took his coffee and left. Now he was sure. This mall had invisible rules, and they were much worse than he had imagined. Keanu sat on a bench near the food court. He took a sip of his coffee and looked around. He saw a waiter trying to take an order from a young man dressed simply, sitting alone. But before he could finish writing it down, the restaurant manager approached and whispered something in his ear. The young man waited a few seconds, but the waiter never came back. The young man looked around, uncomfortable, and finally got up and left. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment. The security guard's voice came again. "Seriously, man, you need to leave." Keanu sighed and turned slowly. The security guard was there now, even more rigid. "I already told you to go. This isn't your place." Keanu clenched his fists, not in anger, not in haste, but inside him. A decision had already been made. Tomorrow he would return, but not as just another customer. The security guard approached again, this time with an even more rigid stance. "I already told you to leave. This isn't your place." Keanu clenched his fists, not in anger, not in haste, but inside him. A decision had already been made. Tomorrow he would return, but not as just another customer. The luxury mall shined as always. The same immaculate marble floors, the same expensive fragrance in the air, the same aura of exclusivity. But today would be different. Keanu Reeves entered the corridors exactly as before. Black t-shirt, sunglasses, and a black baseball cap. But this time, he was not alone. In strategic spots around the mall, his private security personnel were discreetly positioned. They weren't wearing expensive suits or flashing badges, but they were there, observing everything. Keanu walked slowly, his eyes sharp. He knew that within seconds, the security guard would find him, and this time, he was ready. The same security guard from the previous day stepped into view. First, he frowned in surprise. Then came the irritation. He walked straight toward Keanu, quick and determined. "You've got to be kidding me." His voice was laced with impatience. Keanu remained calm. "Good morning." "No good morning. I already told you, man. You need to leave." This time, Keanu did not step back. Instead, he slowly removed his sunglasses. The security guard hesitated. He still didn't recognize him, but something about the way Keanu looked at him made him take half a step back. "Are you sure you want to remove me?" Keanu asked, his voice calm but firm. The security guard folded his arms, trying to hold his ground. I am. You're not welcome here. Keanu smirked slightly. Interesting, because I own this place. Before the security guard could react, an anxious voice interrupted. Mr. Reeves. The manager of one of the high-end stores came rushing over, his face pale. He knew that name, and now, as he looked at Keanu without the sunglasses, he recognized that face. The color drained from his complexion. Oh my God. Keanu said nothing. He just watched. The security guard looked at the manager, then at Keanu, trying to piece it together. Wait, what do you mean, owner? The manager tried to hide his panic. This is Mr. Reeves, he. But Keanu cut him off. I am the owner of this mall. The words landed like a weight in the air. The security guard froze. His face went rigid, his breathing shallow. Then Keanu took a step forward. Now tell me, who really doesn't belong here? The next few seconds felt endless. Customers began to notice what was happening. Some whispered among themselves. A woman discreetly pulled out her phone to record. The security guard looked around, searching for support, but no one came to help him. Keanu held his ground. How many people have you treated like this? He asked. The security guard didn't answer. How many customers have you thrown out just because you decided they didn't belong here? The man averted his gaze. The manager wiped his forehead, visibly nervous. Mr. Reeves, I can explain, the manager said. Keanu raised a hand, stopping him. Not now. But you will explain to me, to every employee, and to everyone who has ever been treated this way here. The mall was completely silent, but the storm was only just beginning. Tomorrow, he would return, and this time, everyone would know. This time, Keanu didn't step back. He simply lifted his gaze from behind his sunglasses and said, Someone like me? And who decides that? The security guard hesitated, but before he could answer, a voice behind them interrupted. It was the manager, and his face was pale as a ghost. The entire mall seemed to hold its breath. Keanu stood firm, his gaze locked on the security guard, who had now gone pale. The manager, still sweating, was trying to regain control of the situation. Customers were watching. Employees were watching. This was no longer just a confrontation. It was a public moment of reckoning. The manager cleared his throat, his voice shaking. Mr. Reeves, I sincerely apologize. If I had known. Keanu cut him off with a calm but unwavering tone. If you had known who I was, you would have treated me differently. The manager blinked, unsure of what to say. Keanu took a slow step forward. And what about everyone else? The ones you didn't recognize? How did you treat them? Silence. The security guard shifted uncomfortably, his authority crumbling in real time. Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. With a few taps, he opened a file, screenshots of hundreds of complaints. One-star reviews from customers detailing how they had been ignored, mistreated, or outright asked to leave for no reason other than how they looked. He held the phone up for the manager to see. This mall has a rating of 1.8 stars out of 5, Keanu said, his voice steady. 5,000 reviews. And do you know what the most common complaint is? The manager swallowed hard. Keanu scrolled down and read aloud. The staff treats you like garbage if you don't look rich enough. I was asked to leave just for browsing. Security follows you like you're a criminal. Keanu lowered the phone and looked straight into the manager's eyes. This is your reputation. The manager had no words. He wiped his face, his hands trembling. The security guard finally found his voice. I was just doing my job, he muttered. Keanu tilted his head slightly. Your job, he repeated. And what exactly is your job? Deciding who belongs and who doesn't. The guard clenched his jaw but said nothing. Keanu nodded. I get it. You thought you were enforcing the rules. He looked around the mall. But tell me, whose rules were they? Silence. The guard shifted on his feet, his confidence gone. I didn't mean any harm, the guard said. Keanu's voice remained calm. But you did. The words hung in the air. For the first time, the security guard looked genuinely troubled. By now, more customers had gathered, their phones out, recording. Keanu turned slightly, addressing the growing crowd. How many of you have ever felt unwelcome here? A few hesitant hands went up, then more. A woman near the back spoke up. They never look at you if you don't dress a certain way. Another voice. I asked for help at a store once, and they just ignored me. Keanu let their voices fill the space. The manager looked overwhelmed. The security guard looked trapped. Yet no one else from the mall's administration came forward to stop what was happening. They all knew it was true. Keanu finally turned back to the manager. Keanu looked at him steadily. So tell me, what are you going to do about it? The manager swallowed. I can make adjustments, talk to the staff. Not good enough, Keanu interrupted. This is not just a staff issue. It's a culture issue, and culture changes from the top. The manager nodded quickly, eager to fix things. I'll implement new policies, mandatory training. Keanu held up a hand. Not later. Now. The manager hesitated. Keanu turned to one of his private security guards who had been standing nearby, watching everything unfold. Call an emergency staff meeting. Every employee, every manager, every security guard. Right now. The security guard nodded and stepped away to make the call. The manager's face paled even more. Mr. Reeves, this is highly unorthodox. Keanu met his gaze. So is discriminating against your own customers. The manager had no response. It took 20 minutes for the mall staff to gather in the central atrium. Employees whispered among themselves, uncertain of what was happening when they saw Keanu standing at the front. Some looked surprised, others relieved. He stepped forward, his voice clear. This mall is mine, he said, but it does not belong to me alone. It belongs to the people who walk through these doors every day. He paused, letting the words settle. And for too long, too many of those people have been made to feel like they don't belong. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Some employees exchanged guilty glances. Keanu continued, that changes today. He turned to the manager. You have two choices. You can fix this, or I will fix it for you. And I promise you won't like the way I do it. The manager's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. We'll fix it, he said quickly. Keanu nodded. Then prove it. The atmosphere in the mall had shifted. Employees whispered. Security guards stood uncertain. Managers looked uneasy. The reality of their own actions was now inescapable, and Keanu had made it clear. Change was not optional. A few employees, the ones who had always felt uncomfortable with how things were run, exchanged hopeful looks. Maybe, just maybe, things would be different now. Keanu looked around one last time. For the first time, he saw something new in the employees' expressions. Not fear, not tension, hope. He picked up the microphone one last time. This is not just a mall, he said. It's a symbol of what we build together. And today we start over. The manager stuttered, trying to explain, but Keanu took a step forward, never breaking eye contact with the security guard. Now tell me, who really doesn't belong here? The answer would come in the next few minutes, and it wouldn't be what the security guard expected. The tension in the mall had shifted. Employees whispered about what had just happened. Security guards avoided eye contact, and the manager looked like he had swallowed a brick. But Keanu wasn't done. Calling out one security guard and one manager wasn't enough. He knew this problem ran deeper. He walked through the corridors, this time noticing everything. The way employees stiffened when certain executives passed by. The nervous glances, the unspoken rules. There was more to uncover, and he was going to find it. Keanu sat in a quiet corner of the mall, pulled out his phone, and went deeper into the reviews. 1.8 stars out of 5. Over 5,000 reviews, and the comments told a clear story. This mall is beautiful, but the staff treats you like garbage if you don't look rich. I was literally asked to leave for just browsing. They only care about high-end customers. If you don't fit their profile, expect to be ignored or harassed. Even employees look scared. The management here is rotten. Keanu exhaled slowly. It wasn't just about one security guard. It wasn't just about one manager. This was the mall's culture, and that meant the real problem was much higher up. Keanu had full access to everything, so he made a call. A few minutes later, Carlos, a close associate who had helped Keanu manage investments, showed up. Carlos didn't dress like a corporate executive. No suit, no tie, just a laptop and a knowing expression. "I pulled the internal reports," Carlos said, sitting across from Keanu. "It's bad." Keanu leaned forward. "How bad?" Carlos turned the screen around. "Employees have been complaining for years. High turnover, reports of discrimination, fear of speaking up. But here's the kicker." Carlos scrolled down, tapping the screen. All of it has been ignored. The management doesn't even acknowledge the complaints. They keep replacing staff and silencing problems instead of fixing them. Keanu's jaw tightened. He had suspected something deeper, but this was deliberate. Carlos continued. "It's not just customers. Even employees leave terrible reviews. Look at this one." Keanu read the highlighted complaint. "Working here was a nightmare. The managers only care about keeping the right kind of people happy. If you question anything, you're gone." Another one. "You either follow their rules or get replaced. No one fights back because everyone's scared." Carlos exhaled. "The security guy from earlier? He's a symptom, not the disease." Keanu nodded slowly. "So who's really responsible?" Carlos tapped a name on the screen. Keanu's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Lancaster, head of mall operations, the real power behind the scenes." Mr. Lancaster was exactly what Keanu expected. A corporate shark in an expensive suit, sitting behind a massive mahogany desk in an office that felt like it belonged to a king, not a mall manager. Lancaster barely looked up when Keanu entered. "You should have scheduled a meeting," he said, typing something on his computer. "I assume you're here about the little scene earlier?" Keanu didn't sit. "That scene was a symptom of a much bigger problem," he said, his voice steady. Lancaster finally looked up and smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile a man gives when he thinks he's untouchable. "Mr. Reeves," Lancaster said, leaning back. "You're an investor, an owner, you're a businessman. Surely you understand that certain policies are necessary to maintain a high-end shopping experience." Keanu's eyes darkened. "You mean policies that keep certain people out?" Lancaster tilted his head. "We cater to a specific clientele." Keanu's patience was wearing thin. "And what happens to the employees who disagree with you?" Lancaster sighed dramatically. "Look, this is just how things work. Customers come here expecting a certain standard, and yes, that means making sure the wrong kind of people don't ruin the experience." Keanu clenched his jaw. "And who decides who the wrong kind is?" Lancaster smirked. "I do." Keanu stared at him for a long moment. Then he spoke. "Not anymore." Lancaster chuckled. "And what are you going to do about it?" Keanu took out his phone and pressed play. The recording of their conversation played loud and clear. Carlos had been recording from the moment Keanu walked into the office, and now Lancaster's own voice filled the room. "Yes, that means making sure the wrong kind of people don't ruin the experience." "And who decides who the wrong kind is?" Keanu asked. "I do." Lancaster's face went pale. Keanu let the audio finish, then pocketed his phone. "You're done," Keanu said simply. Within an hour, Lancaster's reign over the mall was over. The board had no choice but to remove him after Keanu made the recording public. News spread fast, employees whispered, and customers cheered. The toxic culture of the mall was collapsing in real time, and in the middle of it all, Keanu stood quietly, watching the walls of discrimination come crumbling down. Carlos joined him, shaking his head. "That was a hell of a risk," he said. "But damn, that was satisfying." Keanu took a slow breath. "It's not over," he said. "The culture won't change overnight, but at least now they know someone is watching." Carlos nodded. "And Lancaster?" Keanu turned slightly, watching as security escorted the former manager out. Lancaster's eyes met his, and this time, Keanu was the one who didn't look away. Carlos cleared his throat and looked at Keanu seriously. "If you want to fix this, you're going to have to go after some powerful people. This is going to make a lot of people uncomfortable." Keanu adjusted his baseball cap. "Good, because I'm not here to keep anyone comfortable." The mall had changed overnight. News of Mr. Lancaster's removal spread fast. Employees whispered about it in the corridors. Some were shocked, others relieved. Keanu had taken down the man at the top, but he knew that wasn't enough. A system like this didn't exist because of just one person. It was allowed to exist, and now he was going to make sure that changed. He turned to Carlos. "I want every employee in one room right now." Carlos raised an eyebrow. "You're serious?" Keanu nodded. "This isn't just about management. I want to hear from the people who work here, the ones who live this every day." Carlos exhaled and pulled out his phone. "All right, this is going to get messy." "Good," Keanu said. "Messy means change." It took an hour to gather everyone. The main event space in the mall filled up with employees, cashiers, janitors, security guards, store managers, restaurant staff. Some looked skeptical, others looked hopeful. Keanu stood at the front. No podium, no microphone, just him. "I won't take up too much of your time," he began, "but I need to know the truth." A murmur went through the crowd. Keanu continued, "I own this place, but I haven't been paying attention. That changes today." Not everyone in the room agreed. Some of the higher-ranking managers stood with their arms crossed, clearly unhappy. One of them, a man in a sharp suit, finally stepped forward. "Mr. Reeves," he said, forcing a smile, "I respect what you're trying to do, but let's not blow things out of proportion." Keanu met his gaze. "You think this is exaggerated?" The man hesitated. "It's complicated." "No," Keanu said. "It's simple. People here are being treated like they don't matter, and that stops now." Another manager, a woman, shook her head. "You're making changes without understanding how this mall operates. We have a certain image to maintain." Keanu exhaled, then took a slow step forward. "You think an image is more important than people?" The woman folded her arms. "If we change too much, we risk alienating our high-end clientele." Keanu studied her for a moment, then pulled out his phone and opened the mall's online reviews again. "Do you know who else you've been alienating?" He held up the screen. "Everyone else." The crowd murmured. "You've been driving away good people, good customers, because you think only a certain type of person deserves to be here." He lowered the phone. "That ends today." Keanu turned to the employees again. "I want to make this place better," he said, "but I can't do that without you." A woman from the cleaning staff raised her hand. "What's going to change?" Keanu nodded. "Starting today, every employee will be treated with respect. If anyone, customer or manager, treats you unfairly, I want to know about it." A few people exchanged surprised looks. Keanu continued, "There will be no more selective treatment of customers. If someone walks through these doors, they deserve to be here. Period." One of the younger employees, a barista, hesitated before speaking. "And what if the managers don't agree?" Keanu's voice was firm. "Then they can work somewhere else." Keanu turned back to the managers. "I'm not here to fire people for no reason," he said, "but I won't let this place keep running on fear and discrimination." He let the words settle. "You have a choice. Either you help fix this, or I'll replace you with people who will." Silence. Then, slowly, one of the managers nodded. "We'll cooperate." Keanu looked at the others, one by one. They nodded too, some reluctantly, some genuinely, but the message was clear. Change was coming. Keanu looked around. For the first time, he saw expressions of hope on the employees' faces. He picked up the microphone. "This is not just a mall," he said. "This is a symbol of what we can build together. And today we start over." The mall felt different for the first time in years. The employees walked with their heads held higher. The whispers of fear had been replaced by murmurs of possibility. Keanu had shaken the foundation. Now he had to make sure it didn't crumble back into the same old system. He walked through the corridors, watching, listening. Something was happening. It wasn't just about policies or rules. It was about culture, and culture only changed when the people believed in the change. Keanu took one last walk through the mall before heading out. He saw a waiter greeting a young man who looked out of place, but this time, with kindness. He saw a security guard helping a lost customer instead of eyeing them suspiciously. He saw a manager actually smiling at an employee instead of barking orders. Things weren't perfect, they never would be. But they were better, and that was enough for now. Keanu stepped outside, took a breath of fresh air, and put on his sunglasses. It had started as just another night at the mall, but it had become something more, something important. And as he walked away, he knew one thing for certain. He would never be just another customer again. Keanu looked around. For the first time, he saw expressions of hope on the employees' faces. He picked up the microphone and said, "This is not just a mall. This is a symbol of what we can build together. And today we start over." If you enjoyed this story, we have many more that will warm your heart. Click the screen to explore more stories of hope, compassion, and resilience.